Hello Galactic family. We know that they are the favorite subject of all of you. We also know that they are being used to raise the hopes of mankind this time. We know that this category also fall dire warnings. And these are used exactly the opposite effect. Some of the most fantastic predictions that seem positive, in fact, are used because those who begin to imagine them will be taken to a big disappointment, and that is already happening. We will discuss all this. First, let's define what can be a real forecast. From one perspective, a real forecast can be as few as an extension to the future of the possible effects of current causes. For example, if you see a person studying diligently, it would be reasonable to expect that at some point this person can find success. If you see a person participating in an activity that society considers undesirable, it would be reasonable to assume that the company could choose to punish her. What we are discussing today are choosing the same phenomena extended to the realm of the effects of causes that would be so great, so widespread, and so far removed from immediate manifestation that the effect itself seemed disconnected and therefore imperceptible in present. It also include causes as widespread that one can hardly see our own role in them. It would also include the incredibly large amount of causes that an individual being accumulated during many lives, what we call retrograde karma. Usually as few think of it as a negative thing. The awake would be surprised to see the vast amount of good karma that many of us have accumulated. Now think of an even more fantastic amount of positive causes that have been deposited in the piggy bank of mankind for us all. And all this is just waiting to be released for some key amicabem. This is exactly the situation in which our world is now. And the question on our minds is, what is the key? The answer is quite surprising. We are the key. Now, we begin by saying that a prediction depended on the causes of them do not change. And the cause of manifest the world we desire so ardently is our own elevation for a vibrationally higher consciousness. We imagine after all this time and after all the pain and effort that we put changing the trajectory of our lives? Of course not. So what is our forecast for the future? Currently there are prophets of duty pessimistic among us. That's what we think humanity has created. If anyone wants it, he can have. If he chooses to believe it will have any form of fulfillment, is also increasing the number of people who imagine a much better world than any of us have no memory of experience. An increasing number strives to live this hope daily. I repeat, we are what we think humanity has created. If we choose to believe, we will have some form and create our reality. Understand how it works? We are all co-creators of realities we do and we will see. Not long ago this seemed like a ridiculous statement to make. But today it will not cause bewilderment in many places. We can see how we have been launchy then. Back to the subject of forecasts. We feel that the forecasts that we do honestly, sincerely and for the good of all people, deep in our hearts now begin to manifest seriously. The downward spiral of our world is being stopped. And the upward spiral is now definitely in progress. Us to call our engines of conviction. Let's do it. In advice. Love. Wait. Forgive. Do all the things you have learned to do and that will lead to change. Be what you want. The time to be against has passed. Provide for the future in their hearts. That's where it is created. Image result for images on spiritualist doctrine analysis, spiritist deep on forecasts and prophecy by beings of light. Faith needs a base. And that base is the perfect understanding of what must be believed. To believe, not just see, you need to understand. The real conviction only acquired through study, reflection and continuous observation. Unshakable faith is only that which can face the opposite reason, in all ages of mankind. Nothing examining blind faith accepted without checking, so true as false, and every step collides with evidence and reason. Taken to excess, produces fanaticism. All spiritual or psychic experience is undoubtedly an experience of faith, of emotions and feelings that allow the person who experiences such an experience a connection with something that transcends matter. However, the noble encoder clarified that not only experience such an experience of faith, along with the emotional or sentimental. He clarified that it is necessary to reflect, observe, examine, compare and above all go through reasons of such experience to so conclude if this experience was the brainchild, it was the work of mocking spirits or malicious or really was a contact an entity of high moral value. Image result for images on doctrine. The spirit talker taught the method to conduct such an analysis in detail, in the Book of Mediums, such as the mechanisms to identify whether the protester spirit is really a good spirit or only manifests itself with disguises or masks. Taught how to analyze a psychic communication, identified evidence of the presence, or not, malicious spirits. The year 2012 in particular was filled with mediums and channelers who did not observe these basic precepts of the noble encoder. Some messages that any diligent student of a school mediumship identify as work of jokers spirits have mushroomed on the internet. Messages ignoring the most basic tenets of physics and astronomy likewise gained great network, in part by Invigilsia who did not consider what he wrote or received spiritually, in part by Invigilsia who read and accepted without passing through the sieve of reason and comparison. Caution with the matrix of the spiritual experience is of those who experience or who reads or studies, must be the result of the balance between reason and emo on just feel that something looks good, enlightened or well, you need to compare, listen, see if there is logic in a given report. In chapter 24 of the Book of Mediums, items 260 and 261 makes it clear that there are so specialized spirits in scams, which can not only falsifying signatures on messages but also imitate perfectly the way of speaking and the tics of certain spirit of high caliber which is known to the general public. Kardec thus explains. You can also place between the identity of evidence resemblance of handwriting and signature. But besides not being given to all mediums to obtain this result, it is not always a sufficient guarantee. Their forgers in the spirit world, as in ours, will certainly say that a spirit can imitate a signature, can also imitate the language. It is true. We have seen those who take the name of Christ consciousness and to better deceive mimic the evangelical style exceeding in the most known expressions. Truly I tell you. So not enough to be moved by what you see or what appears to be, we must also analyze what is says, reported, written and so compare all the information to be observed if there is logic in them. A noble spirit disembodied known, for example, say in a psychic communication something totally different from what we said when in life? Certainly not. Therefore, it is necessary that faith, emotional experience, emotional and spiritual pass always the test of reason of comparison, the detailed analysis before it is accepted as a reliable experience. The Kardec himself took this method to the extreme in the preparation of the codification. By joining the communications received through various mediums who acted in the process of the 5 books of the codification, he simply dismissed 90% of mediumistic communications were utilized only 10%. Even then, Kardec knew that was not enough a message to speak much of love, but in a few lines in the middle of beautiful words present arguments or strange theories. He also knew that many spirits are presented with good, sweet and noble appearance, but with bad intentions behind a good-looking or an apparent good rhetoric. A message, a lecture, a book must be analyzed as a whole, line by line, word by word, because often small quibbles are purposely placed in the middle of beautiful and noble teachings, and the medium, if it is not sufficiently vigilant, certainly it will be easy prey for express spirits in that kind of fascination. The obsession mechanisms currently also evolved. The concern is coarse or angry spirit that manifests itself not, but the elusive that hides in a small voice, soft, and seeks to use many phrases about love and evolution, and puts in the middle of these, consciously, some strange ideas or even subliminal messages through small commands written or spoken to many people even realize. In paragraphs 261 and 267 of the same chapter of the Book of Mediums, Kardec summarizes brilliantly how to identify a trickster spirit. Here are some excerpts. It must persuade that the perverse spirits are capable of all the cheating, and that the higher the name used, more suspicion should cause. How many mediums have received apocryphal communications signed Jesus, Mary, or some saint venerated? Item 261. The kindness and affability are also essential attributes of purified spirits. They do not feed hatred or toward man nor with the other spirits. Bemoan the weaknesses and criticize errors, but always in moderation, without bitterness or animosity. Item 264. As legitimate expectations that inspire you, the spirits leaders of your work, there is a recommendation that would not be repeated, and that you must always keep in mind to have brought to the studies to think and analyze, submitting to more rigorous control of reason all communications that ye shall receive. To not overlook, since you something looks suspicious, doubtful, or unclear, ask the explanations necessary to form your opinion. Item 266. We must not judge spirits by the formal aspect and the correctness of his style, but probe them, intimate, analyze their words, weigh them coolly, but surely and without prejudice. Every lack of logic, reason, and prudence can leave no doubt as to their origin, whatever the name of the spirit ornament. Item 267. Any notorious scientific heresy, every principle that shocked the sense reveals fraud. Item 267, subsection 7. Good spirits can make us foresee future things when that knowledge is helpful, but never need dates. Every event ad for a certain time is mystifying clue. Item 267. Comment how many spirits have spoken to channelers and mediums in the last 2-3 years talking about big changes soon, and nothing happened, neither apocalypse nor change was really significant, or rise to another dimension or plane. It is important to mention this item, as there is a probable date circling around to the pinnacle of the events of planetary transition, April 24, 2036, but that date it seems that is the result of a comparison of various prophecies of the prophets who have showed their value. By hitting event predictions, is the result of a comparative and systematic study that reached a specific point. This is the claim, a common focus that represents that date and not just a message or plumbing. Citing any date in the future without support them in any comparative or rational basis. Note one thing is a spirit to manifest, drop a date for the apocalypse, new era, or any other mega event without any logic and rationale. Another thing is to find a date, based on a comparative method that creates a focus common to the prophecies of the most reliable prophets of the world. Kardec, even in On the Books of Mediums, item 289, sub-item 8, shows that it is possible to receive information on future events, something perfectly plausible, since the very Christ consciousness/Jesus talked about the future in detail in the prophetic sermon, predicting huge natural events. Sometimes, however, some future events are not announced spontaneously by the spirits of true way. It may happen that the spirit provides things considered appropriate to inform or with the task of proving to you But it is in these cases that more should fear among the mystifying spirits who enjoy making predictions. It is only by the set of circumstances that we can judge the degree of confidence they deserve. Comment: in other words, any prophecy that does not have a logical and rational basis, that is not in keeping with the prophecies of the prophets that have it, other predictions should be simply discarded. Someone prophesying something or believe in any prophecy just based on a calendar or in a scientific heresy, denying all the most reliable prophecies of the world, including the Master Jesus, is certainly someone who will be incurring big mistake in the study of prophecy. It is also important to analyze with broad reflection on prophetic reports Kardec, especially in Genesis, about how there would be a change of era. Unfortunately, there are still spiritualists who believe that the changes will be smooth, without massive cataclysms, apocalyptic, as if the predictions of the Rabbi of Galilee were mere legends. Image result: 4 images on Apocalypse, Genesis, Kardec in Revelation. The earth, in the words of the Spirit, will not have to be transformed by a cataclysm that suddenly annihilate a generation. The current will gradually disappear and the new shall succeed in the same way, without any change in the natural order of things. Genesis by Allan Kardec, Chapter 18, Item 27. This is a paradoxical passage widely used by some lawyers spiritualists to argue that we have no big changes vaticinadas in Revelation. But if the citizen is spiritualistic and its greatest example to follow, according to the doctrine, Christ consciousness/Jesus, precisely because it is spiritualist, as it will discredit the reports that were brought by the Messiah, in the prophetic sermon? Do these spiritualists do not know that the prophetic sermon contained in the 4 Gospels widely studied by coding, is just the story of intense change the natural order? Scientifically we already have the answer. There is seen global warming, changes the poles and melting the polar ice cap, not counting deforestation and excessive environmental pollution. Study of the Genesis. To begin to understand the issue, we must understand that the work Genesis has a difference with respect to other basic works of spiritualism. In many of his writings are still hypothetical theories, the result of personal encoder opinion and not the spiritual doctrine, and many of these ideas were outlined in the Spiritist magazine at the time of Kardec. The noble encoder makes this clear soon after the introduction of the work. The same scruples having presided over the drafting of our other works, they can, in all truth, tell them according to Spiritism, because we were sure of compliance with their general education of spirits. So with this, we can, for similar reasons, present it as a complement to its predecessors, with the exception, however, some still hypothetical theories that we were careful to indicate as such, which should be considered simple personal opinions while they are not confirmed or contradicted, so that does not weigh on the doctrine of the responsibility of them. Incidentally, the assiduous readers of the review will have had occasion to note, undoubtedly form of sketches on, most of the ideas developed here in this work. The review, much time is for us a testing ground, designed to gauge the opinions of men and spirits on some principles, before admitting them as constituent parts of the doctrine. Editors note the reader it is because, while reading this work, distinguishing the portion presented as complementary to the doctrine, that the author himself considers hypothetical and personally deliportato for early analysis, since we assume that not all that was said in the book Genesis belongs to the doctrine, but some personal opinions encoder as he explained in the introduction of the work. Image result: 4 images on the Apocalypse era of change. Coming to Chapter 18, where the famous phrase used by many advocates of change was "no great cataclysmic events," the encoder itself clarifies the end of Item 10. Announcing the time of renewal that had opened for humanity and determined the end of the old world, Jesus, it was fair to say that it would mark by extraordinary phenomena, earthquakes, many scourges, signs in heaven. They are not more than meteors without abrogation of natural law. In other words, it is clear and evident that Genesis lawful think the prophecies of Christ consciousness/Jesus, speaking even about meteors. So how in the same chapter, few items later, it is said that the changes will be without cataclysms? We can only assume, using the reason that the 27 item of opinion is a personal opinion of Kardec and not of doctrine, because the doctrine, as stated in item 10, agrees with the predictions of Christ consciousness/Jesus on cataclysms for the change was. But let's look at the words of the noble encoder, which apparently are the personal opinions he expressed in the work, at least in the second sentence below. The earth, in the words of the Spirit, will not have to be transformed by a cataclysm that suddenly annihilate a generation. I agree with this opinion, because suddenly annihilate a generation would destroy whole. This is the meaning of annihilating the whole human community, or reduce it to negligible levels, something that Jesus also made it clear that will not happen, as noted in prophetic sermon of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24, when he says that half the world population will disincarnating at the height of events, something far removed from annihilation. They still survive billion incarnated people. The current will gradually disappear and the new will succeed it in the same way, without any change in the natural order of things. Genesis was written before 1900, more than 120 years, and the phrase above refers to the generation of that time. Without that should obviously be no radical change in the natural order of things, because the apocalypse was predicted by the Christ consciousness/Jesus for good after that generation. To quote the prophecy of Daniel, 70 periods of the prophetic sermon prophecy that which began in 1967 and ends in 2036. The phrase is fully correct, because it refers to the generation that will experience the height of the apocalypse and much the current, but the generation that lived through the time of Kardec. These misinterpretations are unfortunately still very common among some spiritualists, just as the famous passage in Matthew 24:36 is used by many Christians to say that it is impossible for the exact day and time of the events of the peak are discovered, because repeat the phrase spoken by Christ consciousness/Jesus in this verse. The day and hour no one knows, only the Father who is in heaven. Now the Christ consciousness/Jesus spoke the truth, but he said that for almost 2,000 years in the prophetic sermon, at any time he said that in the future someone could not know. He used the present tense no one knows, but not he said that in the future no one would know, so that he himself, after uttering these words and then disembodied, returned to bring revelation apocalypse to John, the exact revelation of the day and time of the event, according to the Gospels. Therefore, it is important that the spiritualist friends, Catholic, Protestant and Neo-Pentecostals and all Christian lines and use the Gospels as a basis, to abide by a broader interpretation of the texts. It is a simple basic question of interpretation of text, regardless of belief or faith of each. Because the interpretive logic is independent of one's faith, it depends only on your good sense to follow the basic norms of Lego Novum. And is the reminder, the spiritualists and spiritualists study more carefully, more in comparison with respect to prophetic themes. In these words is the schedule of all the changes until you start a new era after 2036. Words that should always serve as a comparative basis over the messaging mediums and channelers, especially those who defended the revelation peak or beginning of a new was the end of 2012. One thing is a spirit to manifest, drop a date for the apocalypse, new era or any other mega event without any logic and rationale. Another thing is to find a date. Based on a comparative method, it creates a common focus to the prophecies of the most reliable prophets of the world. Kardec even in On the Books of Mediums, item 289, subsection 8 shows that it is possible to receive information on future events, something perfectly plausible, since the very Christ consciousness / Jesus talked about the future in detail in the prophetic sermon predicting huge natural events. Sometimes, however, some future events are not announced spontaneously by the spirits of true way. It may happen that the Spirit provides things considered appropriate to inform or with the task of proving to you. But it is in these cases that more should fear the mystifying spirits who enjoy making predictions. It is only by the set of circumstances that we can judge the degree of confidence they deserve.